At first glance, it sounds impossible. How can a house worth tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars fail to find a buyer? In a world where luxury real estate headlines constantly celebrate record-breaking sales, these properties should be irresistible. Prime locations, extreme craftsmanship, every imaginable amenity. And yet, some of the most expensive houses on earth sit unsold for years. Not because they are unknown, not because they lack luxury, but because they cross a psychological and economic line where wealth turns into friction. Welcome to Luxury Level Up. On this channel, we do not just show luxury. We explain why some forms of extreme wealth quietly fail. This episode explores a rarely discussed phenomenon, ultra-luxury homes that became so expensive, so extreme, or so impractical that even billionaires walked away. These are not abandoned mansions. They are actively marketed, publicly promoted, and professionally staged, yet rejected. And the reasons are far more interesting than price alone. Michael Jordan's mansion, the $29 million legend that sat for 12 years. This is one of the clearest examples of an impossible problem in luxury real estate. A mansion famous worldwide, packed with elite amenities and still unwanted for more than a decade. Michael Jordan's former estate in the Chicago suburbs was originally listed for $29 million. It is massive, gated, and built like a private sports compound. A full-size indoor basketball court, a cigar room, a putting green, a tennis court, an oversized pool area, and enough space to host events that feel closer to a resort than a residence. Even the front gate became iconic, stamped with the number 23. And yet, buyers kept walking away. The first reason is obvious once you look closely. This house is extremely personalized. It is not a neutral, modern trophy home. It is a Jordan-specific property designed around one person's lifestyle, image, and era. That makes it hard to adopt as your own without spending millions more on redesign and modernization. The second issue is the hidden cost of ownership. A property of this size is not just a purchase, it is an operating system. Staffing, heating, security, repairs, landscaping, taxes, everything scales up. Even wealthy buyers tend to avoid homes that feel like permanent management projects. Then there is the market reality. This is not Beverly Hills or Manhattan. Ultra-rich buyers often prefer globally liquid locations where resale is easy. A hyper-custom mega estate outside Chicago does not have a deep buyer pool at that price point. After years of price cuts and no deal, the final result was brutal. The mansion ultimately sold for about $9.5 million, a fraction of the original ask. It is the perfect proof that at the top end, luxury can become so specific and so expensive to run that the market simply refuses it. Jardim Pernambuco, the mansion so valuable, they chose to destroy it. In Rio de Janeiro, the ultimate proof that luxury is sometimes just a placeholder for something else is this. Brazil's most expensive house was not bought to be lived in, it was bought to be erased. Inside Jardim Pernambuco, an ultra-private enclave in Leblon, a trophy mansion changed hands for 220 million Brazilian reais, roughly $40 million depending on exchange rates at the time. The headline made it sound like a victory lap for extreme wealth, a record-breaking residence in one of the most exclusive addresses in the country. A home with panoramic sea views and the kind of footprint that feels impossible inside a dense, high-status neighborhood. But what happened next is the part that fits this episode. The buyer was not a billionaire looking for the perfect Brazilian escape. It was a construction company, and their plan was not to preserve the mansion. It was to demolish it and replace it with a new ultra-luxury residential project. That is the real story. The mansion itself was not the prize. The land was. At this level, a home can become too specific to keep. A design built around someone else's taste, someone else's lifestyle, someone else's era of luxury. Even if the property is spectacular, the next buyer may see it as inefficient, too rigid, too dated, too expensive to adapt cleanly. And in ultra-prime neighborhoods, the math is brutal. A developer can often create more total value by starting from zero. multiple new residences, new layouts, modern engineering, full customization, and a product designed for the current market of buyers, not the previous one. So this mansion became a perfect example of a rare truth in extreme real estate. Sometimes the most expensive house in a country is still not desirable as a house. It is desirable as a blank canvas. The one, the mansion that proved bigger, is not always better. The one was designed to be the ultimate trophy home in the United States. Located in Bel Air, Los Angeles, this mega mansion was originally marketed as the most expensive private residence in America. Its creator envisioned it not as a house, but as a statement. One property meant to sit above all others, financially and symbolically. At full scale, the one spans roughly 105,000 square feet, making it closer to a private resort than a residence. The amenities list reads like a catalog of excess. Multiple swimming pools, a nightclub-style entertainment space, a private cinema, a bowling alley, a full-scale wellness spa, wine rooms, salons, and garages designed to showcase dozens of luxury cars. Every feature was designed to impress instantly, especially on camera. But that was also the problem. The house was not built around how people actually live. It was built around how people look living. Maintaining a property of this size requires an enormous permanent staff, massive operating costs, and constant technical upkeep. Even for billionaires, owning the one meant inheriting a logistical system rather than a home. Financial reality eventually caught up. After years of delays, mounting debt, and legal pressure, the property was forced into a public auction. Instead of selling anywhere near its original asking price of hundreds of millions, the one sold in 2022 for approximately $141 million, a fraction of what was once claimed. Despite the discount, the buyer did not acquire a dream house. They acquired a challenge, adapting an extremely specific, over-engineered structure to something livable, secure, and sustainable long-term. The lesson of the one is simple but brutal. At the highest level of luxury, desirability is not about size alone. It is about control, efficiency, and flexibility. When a mansion becomes too extreme, even the ultra-rich hesitate. The one was built to dominate the market. Instead, it exposed the limits of excess. Villa Leopolda, the legendary Riviera. Estate that nobody can truly replace. Villa Leopolda is one of the most famous private estates in Europe and, paradoxically, one of the hardest ultra-luxury properties to deal with. Located on the French Riviera, overlooking the Mediterranean between Nice and Monaco, this estate represents a level of old-world wealth that modern buyers often admire, but hesitate to inherit. Built in the early 20th century for King Leopold II of Belgium, the villa was never designed as a home in the modern sense. It was conceived as a dynastic residence, a place meant to embody power, diplomacy, and permanence. The estate spans tens of acres, with terraced gardens cascading down toward the sea, manicured over decades and maintained like a living museum. The residence itself is vast, but deliberately understated compared to its surroundings. Multiple wings, formal salons, service quarters, and guest accommodations are spread across the property, all oriented around privacy and long-term hosting rather than convenience. The gardens are the real crown jewel, widely considered among the most elaborate private gardens in Europe, requiring a full-time team simply to exist. And this is precisely the issue. Villa Leopolda is not just expensive to buy, it is expensive to keep alive. Staffing, gardening, security, restoration, and compliance with French heritage regulations turn ownership into a full-scale operation. Any renovation is complex, slow, and heavily restricted. Customization is limited. Flexibility is minimal. For modern billionaires, especially those used to tailored, tech-driven homes, this kind of estate can feel more like a responsibility than a reward. It is magnificent but rigid, prestigious but demanding. Many ultra-wealthy buyers admire it as an icon rather than pursue it as a residence. Villa Leopolda exists in a category of its own, too historic to modernize freely, too famous to simplify, too large to feel effortless. It is not unwanted because it lacks value. It is unwanted because it demands a very specific kind of owner. Buckingham Palace, the most valuable home that no one could ever buy. At the absolute top of the hierarchy sits a residence that perfectly embodies the idea of a property that is priceless, untouchable, and fundamentally impossible to own in the conventional sense. Buckingham Palace. Technically, it is a residence. In reality, it is something far beyond that. Buckingham Palace is not designed to be bought, sold, renovated freely, or adapted to personal taste. It exists as a state asset, a symbol of national continuity rather than private wealth. And that is precisely why it represents the ultimate form of unwanted real estate for even the richest individuals on Earth. The palace contains hundreds of rooms, vast ceremonial halls, private apartments, offices, archives, and infrastructure built to serve an entire monarchy. Its scale is immense, but unlike modern mega-mansions, none of it exists to offer flexibility or lifestyle optimization. Every space has protocol, history, and restrictions attached to it. From a billionaire's perspective, Buckingham Palace is the worst possible luxury asset. It cannot be customized, it cannot be monetized, it cannot be sold. Maintenance costs are astronomical, renovation timelines stretch across decades, and every change requires layers of approval tied to heritage preservation and public accountability. Even if it were hypothetically placed on the market, the buyer would not truly own it in the way modern, ultra-wealthy individuals expect to own property. There would be obligations, symbolic weight, political implications, and constant public scrutiny. Privacy, one of the most valuable currencies in extreme wealth, would be non-existent. Buckingham Palace exposes a final truth about ultra-luxury real estate. There's a point where value becomes symbolic rather than functional. It is the most expensive home on Earth, not because someone wants to live there, but because it represents something money alone cannot control. And that is why, in a world where billionaires can buy islands, cities of glass, and entire landscapes, this is the one residence that will never truly belong to any of them. These homes prove that extreme wealth does not always equal freedom. At the very top, luxury can become rigid, impractical, or impossible to adapt. Some properties are simply too symbolic, too massive, or too specific to truly be lived in, no matter how much money you have. If you want to explore more places where wealth reaches its limits, where luxury becomes excess, and where power reshapes reality, subscribe to Luxury Level Up and watch our next episodes.